The scream cut through the morning mist like a blade. August 12, 1843, Willoughbrook Plantation, South Carolina, an estate so pristine it hid rot beneath its white columns, the scent of magnolias masking decay. That scream belonged to Catherine Hargrove. She had stumbled into a truth so unspeakable that it would haunt a town for decades, a revelation that newspapers refused to print, sealed away until historians dared pry open forbidden drawers 80 years later. Edmund Hargrove, her husband, scion of old money, church deacon, town councilman, gentleman of impeccable manners and ruthless ambition, had a secret. In the east wing of their mansion, a wing supposedly under renovation, 3 men waited not by choice, but by circumstance. Marcus, Samuel, Daniel. Slaves by law, pawns in a game of desire, power, and survival. The kind of arrangement designed to humiliate, control, and weaponize humanity against itself. Catherine had been taught obedience, patience, silence, the art of appearing untouched while noticing everything. But that morning, everything she had been trained to endure collided with a reality she could no longer deny. Edmund, the public exemplar of virtue, lay entwined in betrayal and dominance, a private world operating by rules she could not comprehend but instinctively understood. This is the moment when history shifts, the point where appearances crumble, and the machinery of control behind wealth and power is exposed. Every plantation, every mansion, every seat of influence depends on secrecy. Secrets create leverage. Secrets protect tyrants. Secrets enslave more than bodies, they enslave minds. Catherine's awakening that day would set in motion a chain of retribution the town itself could not ignore, a punishment meticulously orchestrated with the precision of a general commanding troops. Understand this. She did not act out of vengeance alone. She acted with strategy, with an understanding of the human psyche that her husband could not anticipate. She weaponized shame, fear, and the collective morality of a community conditioned to follow social scripts. Within 3 days, the town square would become a stage for something brutal, unforgettable, and morally unsettling. A performance that forced everyone to confront corruption, complicity, and the fragility of a man's constructed identity. And before you tell yourself this is just a story of the past, pause. Consider the patterns, the systems, the invisible hierarchies that govern obedience, silence, and hidden pleasure even today. What you are about to witness is more than scandal, it's a masterclass in power, secrecy, and the consequences of underestimating the one you presume to dominate. Edmund Hargrove's public persona was flawless, a pillar of the town, a man whose very presence commanded obedience. But behind closed doors, in the East Wing no one entered, he curated a private world built on control, manipulation, and silent compliance. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel were not merely servants. They were instruments, carefully positioned, each fulfilling a role that kept the master's secret alive. Their freedom of will had been stripped long before that August morning, replaced with a calculus of survival. Every glance, every gesture, every hesitation had consequences they could not afford. Marcus moved like a shadow, quick, intelligent, always anticipating, always listening. His loyalty was born of necessity, not affection, a fragile shield against punishment. Samuel carried muscle and quiet defiance, a strength that simmered beneath the surface, constrained by laws and lashes and the invisible chains of fear. Daniel, slight and precise, observed, catalogued, understood the angles, the secrets, the unspoken rules. All 3 lived within a structure that demanded compliance yet thrived on psychological torment. Edmund did not merely control their bodies. He manipulated their perception of reality, crafting a world where pleasure and punishment were inseparable, where obedience became instinct and survival became submission. Catherine, until that morning, had been watching, learning, decoding patterns. She saw the subtle changes in Marcus' movements when Edmund arrived, the tension in Samuel's shoulders, the calculated silence in Daniel's eyes. She noticed doors locked for hours, rooms claimed as forbidden, the carefully timed absences, the faint sense of oil lamps and human flesh mingled together in a private world she was never meant to enter. And yet she understood. Humans are predictable even in their desire, even when they wield power. There is always a point where control falters, where the weight of secrecy becomes a weapon against the keeper of the secret itself. What Catherine realized was that she held more than knowledge, she held leverage. A single observation, a single public revelation, could invert power dynamics that had governed Willoughbrook for generations. The plantation was a microcosm of the larger systems of power: hierarchy, secrecy, psychological domination, and ritual humiliation. It was the perfect storm for exposing human fragility, for turning the tools of control back on the one who believed himself untouchable. And this is where you, listening now, must pause and reflect. Systems like these do not vanish with history. They evolve, hidden in plain sight. Control is always exercised through the manipulation of knowledge, the orchestration of perception, the silencing of those who might reveal the truth. Catherine's awakening was not merely personal, it was systemic. And what she would unleash in the days to come would be a lesson in power, precision, and the terrifying cost of underestimating the observant. Now take a moment, absorb this, understand that secrets are not passive. They are alive, and some once revealed change everything. Catherine Hargrove did not scream out of rage alone. Her scream was the ignition of a plan years in the making, a strategy born from observation, patience, and a deep understanding of human psychology. She had watched the men Marcus, Samuel, Daniel watch Edmund. She had catalogued every glance, every tremor of complicity, every hint of fatigue that whispered of hidden tension. And she had catalogued him too, her husband, the man whose charm and authority masked the rot beneath. She understood that power is never absolute. It is contingent on perception, on belief, on fear, and she intended to dismantle it. In the days after that morning, the air in Bowford shifted, almost imperceptibly at first. Neighbors noticed her calm demeanor, the subtle confidence in her eyes. Catherine moved with precision, planting whispers, watching reactions, testing the boundaries of curiosity and gossip. Every servant, every friend, every townsman became a piece on a chessboard. She did not act in haste. She acted like a surgeon, cutting away layers of deception, exposing vulnerability where none had been suspected. And then came the summons. A note slipped to key citizens, a word here, a nudge there. The town square, usually a place of routine, of banal meetings and Sunday announcements, became the stage for something darker. Catherine understood collective psychology, the crowd as a weapon, shame as a tool, the spectacle as a masterstroke. She knew how to orchestrate an audience, how to amplify terror, how to turn communal judgment into an instrument of punishment. Edmund's control, built over decades, was about to be inverted with surgical precision. Inside the mansion, the East Wing became a prison of anticipation. Edmund, unaware of the depth of Catherine's strategy, remained confident in his private dominion. But he underestimated the one constant in every system of power, the observer who refuses to be complicit, the one who sees the invisible threads that bind bodies, minds, and reputations. And when the day came, when the town gathered under the hot South Carolina sun, Edmund would discover that secrecy, once weaponized against him, was lethal. Understand this. What you are witnessing is not simply a historical anecdote. This is a blueprint of psychological warfare. This is the anatomy of control, of rebellion, of the human instinct to reclaim justice when the system itself condones immorality. Observe how she bends the collective will, how she transforms bystanders into instruments of accountability, how she converts outrage into spectacle. And here, before we descend even deeper, I want you to do something. Comment the phrase, "I see the hidden" twice. Do it now. It locks in awareness, signals understanding, and awakens the part of you that recognizes patterns others miss. The town square of Bowford had never been this quiet. That oppressive silence, the kind that precedes storms, carried the weight of anticipation. On August 15, 1843, over 300 citizens gathered, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by the gravity of an event that would carve itself into memory for generations. At the center of the square, beneath the relentless sun, Edmund Hargrove stood exposed not merely physically, but in every sense that mattered. His polished demeanor, his cultivated authority, his social dominance all stripped away by the woman he had underestimated, by the very systems he had manipulated for years. Catherine stood at the edge of the crowd, composed, commanding, a silent conductor of what was unfolding. Every gaze in the square, every whisper, every measured step, was a note in her symphony of retribution. She understood that power, when wielded subtly, does not merely punish, it transforms. The onlookers were not passive witnesses. They were instruments of enforcement, activated by shame, morality, and fear. Each citizen, consciously or not, participated in the dismantling of a man who had believed himself untouchable. Edmund's humiliation was meticulous. He was forced to confront his duplicity, the intimate betrayals that had remained secret for so long. The men he had coerced, controlled, and exploited. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel stood not as victims, but as living reminders of the consequences of absolute power misused. The town watched, and in watching, internalized lessons about morality, dominance, and the fragility of reputation. Every gasp, every murmured judgment, reinforced the lesson. Even those at the pinnacle of society are vulnerable, exposed to forces they cannot control. But there was more here than punishment. There was a psychological awakening, both for Edmund and the town. Shame became a tool not just for the individual but for the collective. Catherine demonstrated how knowledge can be weaponized, how observation becomes leverage, how silence can be shattered with devastating precision. What the town witnessed was more than scandal, it was the anatomy of power inverted, a cautionary tale wrapped in visceral spectacle. And consider this, quietly, for yourself. The world you navigate today is filled with invisible dynamics like these. People in positions of influence, those who operate in secrecy, rely on obedience, fear, and perception. The story of Willoughbrook is not a relic, it is a mirror. Catherine's orchestration shows that awareness is power, observation is control, and timing is lethal. One wrong assumption, one ignored signal, and the carefully constructed world of a manipulator collapses entirely. The sun had set on Beaufort's town square, but the echoes of that day did not fade. For Edmund Hargrove, the humiliation was not fleeting, it was a permanent fracture. A psychological wound carved by precision and foresight. The carefully maintained masks of authority, respectability, and invulnerability lay in ruins. Every handshake, every glance from a neighbor, every whispered conversation carried the weight of judgment. He had learned, too late, the most dangerous lesson of all. Power is only as secure as the perception of others, and perception can be manipulated with devastating precision. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel returned to the East Wing under Catherine's quiet watch, no longer merely instruments of survival, but witnesses to the inversion of control. They had seen a man toppled not by brute force alone, but by strategy, observation, and timing, the truest forms of power. Their understanding of agency shifted in that moment. Survival was no longer just compliance. It was understanding the invisible systems, the psychological currents, and the latent vulnerabilities of those who seemed untouchable. The town itself bore the mark of that morning. Collective conscience, once dormant or complicit, had been awakened. Citizens carried new awareness of the fragility of social hierarchies, the consequences of silence, and the subtle ways manipulation can dominate not only individual lives, but entire communities. Gossip became a weapon, morality a tool, observation a discipline. Beaufort, forever changed, became a microcosm of truth. When systems of control are exposed, they unravel not quietly, but in ways that force every participant to reckon with their complicity. Catherine, meanwhile, retreated to the quiet of her chambers, her posture calm, her mind alert, a strategist who had achieved not vengeance alone, but mastery. She understood the architecture of influence, the mechanics of obedience, and the latent power in patience. The lesson she imparted, intentionally or not, extended beyond revenge. It was a blueprint for anyone willing to see beyond appearances, to navigate systems of secrecy, to weaponize awareness. And here, reflecting on the echoes of history, consider your own environment. Systems of control are everywhere, in institutions, in relationships, in unseen hierarchies. Catherine's orchestration was not mere storytelling. It is a lesson in psychological warfare, observation, and precision. Knowledge is power, yes, but timing and strategy convert knowledge into absolute leverage. Before we descend further, I want you to repeat a phrase to solidify awareness. Comment, "I see the hidden twice." Again. Do it deliberately. Lock in the understanding that observing patterns is the first step toward mastery. That awareness is not passive, it is active, strategic, and dangerous to those who presume dominance. What happened at Willoughbrook did not end in the town square. History has a way of burying lessons, of folding inconvenient truths into archives no one opens. Yet the ripples of that day traveled far beyond Edmund Hargrove's shattered reputation. Systems of power, corruption, and secrecy did not vanish. They merely adapted. What Catherine revealed, the fragility of control, the vulnerability of those who believe themselves untouchable, remains a constant in every hierarchy, every institution that relies on obedience, silence, and fear. Consider the machinery behind this scandal. Newspapers withheld details for decades, legal documents were sealed, and historians later described the records as too sensitive, too dangerous for public eyes. Knowledge was power, and those in positions of authority understood this instinctively. Suppressing the truth was not merely bureaucratic, it was strategic. Control requires the careful management of perception, the shaping of narrative, the deliberate erasure of inconvenient facts. The truth itself becomes a tool wielded selectively, like a blade that can either protect or punish. Catherine's brilliance was in exploiting that same system. She weaponized awareness, timing, and societal expectation. She turned secrecy into leverage and morality into execution. The moral architecture of Willoughbrook was a stage upon which she performed, demonstrating that even the most entrenched structures could be dismantled by someone who sees the hidden strings. Her act was not just personal vengeance, it was a demonstration of universal principle. Power, when unchallenged, corrodes. Secrets, when revealed, reshape reality. And compliance, when assumed to be absolute, is an illusion. The men she liberated, in a sense, Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel, became living reminders of systemic imbalance. Their obedience had been coerced, their survival conditional, their dignity suspended over years of silent calculation. Yet the revelation of truth, orchestrated by Catherine, altered the psychic landscape. Power had shifted not with weapons but with observation, precision, and strategy. And here lies the dangerous lesson. The structures that govern human behavior, wealth, law, influence, morality, are only as stable as the collective willingness to obey without question. Catherine's manipulation of that willingness is a blueprint. The invisible strings of control exist in every era, every society. What changes is who notices, who acts, and who understands that observation, timing, and strategy are more potent than brute force. By the time the sun set on Willoughbrook Plantation, the truth had spread not in whispers alone, but in a subtle, enduring contagion. Catherine's orchestration demonstrated something far more profound than personal vengeance. The mechanics of control, the fragility of constructed authority, and the terrifying efficiency of knowledge wielded with intent. Power is never merely physical. It is psychological, structural, and invisible. A master manipulates bodies, but the one who understands systems manipulates minds. Catherine became that force. The town had been her instrument. The crowd, their judgment, their anticipatory anxiety, all carefully orchestrated. Citizens became unwitting participants in a ritual of exposure, complicit in dismantling authority they had once revered. And Edmund Hargrove, the man who had manipulated others for years, realized too late that the rules of control are not universal, they are contingent upon the willingness of others to believe in your invulnerability. One miscalculation, one overlooked observer, and the entire system collapses. This is the darker pattern repeated throughout history. Elite manipulation thrives on secrecy, on the orchestration of desire and fear, on the selective dissemination of truth. The mechanisms Catherine exploited at Willoughbrook, observation, timing, leverage, and psychological insight, exist in every institution that governs behavior. Politics, business, religion, and social hierarchy. Those who presume dominance often ignore the silent watchers, the patient strategists, the ones who understand that influence is earned, not assumed. Consider the moral cost. Edmund's transgressions were private, yet they exposed a systemic rot. The suppression of those records, the decades of silence, the selective historical memory, this is how institutions protect themselves, how power perpetuates, how injustice persists. Catherine's actions, while personal, illuminated these structures. She revealed that control is maintained not by strength alone, but by secrecy, obedience, and the fear of exposure. And once the fear is weaponized against the oppressor, the system fractures. Now, reflect on this for yourself. Awareness is not passive. It is active, deliberate, and dangerous to those who presume their dominance is absolute. Systems will test you, observe you, and attempt to manipulate your perception. But knowing the rules of control, the hidden levers of influence, is the first step toward mastery. Recognize patterns, anticipate reactions, and understand that perception is more potent than power itself. The echoes of Willoughbrook did not fade with Edmund Hargrove's shattered reputation. They lingered in the town, in the surviving men, in Catherine's quiet triumph, and, most importantly, in the invisible patterns she exposed. Power, as she demonstrated, is never absolute. Authority, no matter how polished or entrenched, rests upon compliance, secrecy, and perception. Remove any one of these, and the structure collapses, often violently, always irrevocably. Catherine's brilliance lay not in brute force but in strategy. She observed, she calculated, she weaponized knowledge and timing. She understood the human psyche, how shame can be amplified into terror, how secrecy can be converted into leverage, how a community can be manipulated to deliver judgment without a single hand raised in vengeance. In that moment, she transformed herself from the quiet, constrained wife into a master of systems, a tactician of morality and perception. What she revealed is terrifying, but necessary. Every society, every hierarchy, every institution relies on invisible levers of control, and those who see them can bend reality itself. Marcus, Samuel, and Daniel became more than survivors. They became witnesses to the raw mechanics of influence, understanding the fragility of authority and the potency of observation. They experienced firsthand the inversion of control, the collapse of constructed dominance, and the subtle but absolute power of a mind awake to systems that others take for granted. Their world, once defined by subjugation, was now illuminated by the dangerous brilliance of awareness. And so it is for you listening now. Willoughbrook is not just a story of betrayal, scandal, or revenge. It is a lesson in mastery, how knowledge, timing, and psychological insight shape reality. Observe patterns. Recognize the unseen levers of influence around you. Understand that compliance is fragile, secrecy is a weapon, and perception governs more than brute strength ever could. To ignore these truths is to remain a pawn. To understand them is to gain access to a power far beyond the visible. Remember this: some knowledge is dangerous precisely because it changes the way you perceive everything. Once you have seen the invisible strings, you cannot unsee them. The world, once hidden in plain sight, becomes a landscape of strategy, leverage, and consequences. Catherine Hargrove's orchestration at Willoughbrook was not just revenge, it was awakening. And now, having followed the descent to its end, you too have been awakened. Comment the phrase, "I see the hidden" twice to lock in awareness and signal you are ready to see what others ignore. Subscribe now to uncover the forbidden histories they tried to bury and awaken truths most men will never understand. Share this video if you've ever seen someone in power fall and recognize the invisible strings they hide behind.